Hello, everybody. I'm Alex, and welcome to the B-Side, where we strive to go beyond the hits and inform you of the music that you might be missing out on. And it's time for another artist discography guide. And today we'll be looking at the discography of Justin Vernon. Justin Vernon, the man behind projects such as Bon Iver, Volcano Choir, Big Red Machine, The Shouting Matches, DeArmond Edison, the list goes on. Undoubtedly, there will be some who wonder why I didn't just do a guide on Bon Iver, but Vernon himself has said that Bon Iver has never been his number one project, but one of many that he is and has been involved in over the years, so I don't think it's fair for me to just focus on this one aspect of his music alone. In an independent music scene where creating a distinct identity for yourself can be remarkably difficult, Vernon has been able to do that in part thanks to the sheer amount of projects he's involved himself in. So today we're going to be discussing all of these projects where Vernon was the primary driving point behind the music. So, as such, we won't be reviewing his collaborations with artists like Kanye West, Aeneas Mitchell, or Vince Staples, but even with that said, there's a lot to unpack here. So, without further ado, let's get the ball rolling. Justin DeArmond Edison Vernon, born April the 30th, 1981. He grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where music was a part of his life from an early age. His diverse taste gained him a formidable musical palate as a boy, and he started writing songs at the age of 12. Vernon's first musical work came in high school at the age of 16 when he formed a band with a group of friends he had met at a jazz camp. The band was called Mount Vernon, which on the one hand is an obvious play off the name of the home of George Washington, but on the other is a testament to the influence that Justin exuded over his contemporaries even then. Mount Vernon released their lone studio album We Can Look Up in 1998. To be very frank, based off the sound quality of this record, you probably wouldn't be able to guess that this is a high school band because the production is very clean. It's a good sounding record. Much of the album is at least tinged with jazz influences, which I think would be a good thing if it wasn't for the fact that the horn players are not great at staying on pitch. There are multiple instances where a saxophone or a trumpet sounds like it's not operating in the same tuning as the other instruments. The songs themselves contain some ambition, though again, there are moments when the band's songwriting choices reveal their youth. The song Super Static tries to connect in almost laughably stereotypical jazz opening with a hard rock section complete with harsh vocals by incorporating a motif borrowed from God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Yes, that makes as little sense as you think it does. But overall, most of what We Can Look Up shows is that the assortment and framework of Mount Vernon was just never going to be sustainable. They would release an EP entitled All of Us Free in 2000, which outlines a more Americana-based sound that the band members would use as a stepping stone for their future projects. As the members graduated from high school and moved on to other things, Vernon went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, majoring in religious studies, and it was during this time that Vernon put out his first proper solo project under the name J.D. Vernon. The album is called Home Is, and Vernon recorded it after having studied abroad for a semester in Ireland. That last fact was more anecdotal than anything else because there aren't many particularly noticeable Irish-specific influences on here, though the song When It Rains Down Here has a nice violin line that sounds vaguely Celtic-flavored. The focus of this record is Justin taking a stab at the blues, and not doing a half-bad job at it either. His gruff baritone voice suits the genre nicely, and even if the songwriting is, again, a bit patchy at times, the positives here are really about the remarkable aesthetic that Vernon is able to capture with just his voice and an acoustic guitar, with the occasional additional sparse accompaniment. The track Lullaby of the Three Dancers exemplifies the personality of his guitar playing. He's very good at the instrument already, and it really feels like that's what drives these tracks from start to finish. If there's one thing about Home Is that I don't particularly care for personally, it's that Vernon has a penchant for writing long songs that don't need to be long. 3 of the tracks here run 8 minutes or longer, and in my opinion, they're a bit too stagnant to justify their length. The standout track here for me is Leave It Alone Blues for two reasons. In part because of the distorted trombone solo in the middle, which makes for an interesting change of pace, but also because of the guest vocalist on the track, former Mount Vernon member and Vernon's then girlfriend, Sarah Emma Jensen, who will play a big part in the Justin Vernon story a few years down the line. While at Eau Claire, Vernon maintained contact with many of his old Mount Vernon bandmates, and he would continue to play with some of them periodically throughout the years under the band name DeArmond Edison, after Vernon's two middle names. DeArmond Edison gradually became a more serious, focused project for Vernon and his other bandmates, and while they were in Eau Claire, they recorded 2 albums worth of material in studio. Wishing to expand their musical horizons in a new location, the band moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 2004, and that same year they released their self-titled debut album. This record builds off the more Americana-flavored sound of later Mount Vernon tracks, and it's clear that this is a genre Vernon is very comfortable with. One might almost say he is too comfortable with this, because as he did with Home Is, Vernon once again is just dragging out these songs too long for their own good. I was listening to this album and I kept looking at my phone, expecting for the song I was listening to be over, because it sounded like it was about time for the song to end. It made sense for the song to end there. And alas, I was only to find out that there was still 3 minutes remaining every damn time. The track There Is Something is arguably the worst offender, somehow managing to prolong the same one-note dirge-like beat for 7 minutes of runtime. I can praise the moods that Vernon creates. The aesthetic of this record is quite nice, if perhaps a little bit on the generic side. I like the marimba in the track The Lake, that's a nice touch. And the closing track For Bill is a surprisingly emotional track, especially given that it's an instrumental, some terrific dynamics in that one. But overall, this album is an hour long when I think it could easily be at least 10 minutes shorter, if not 15 or even 20. DeArmond Edison would release their second and final album, Silent Signs, a year later, in 2005. Thankfully, this album does not have nearly as many unnecessarily long tracks as the self-titled record did. And while the lyrical sentiments and instrumentation haven't changed much from the self-titled, something about the aesthetics of these songs has, at least with the softer numbers. More focus is being given to Vernon and his guitar specifically, and when you combine that with the less dirge-like atmosphere of this record, something pops out that just wasn't there before. It's not quite a predecessor to Vernon's future solo projects, but there is an identity being forged in some of these tracks. And as was the case with Mount Vernon, it's clear that DeArmond Edison is quickly becoming less of a band and more of a Vernon-centric operation. Perhaps Justin noticed this as well, because around the time of this album's release, he began focusing on solo efforts a bit more, releasing 2 records under his own name within the next 2 years. The first of these is the grandest of the two, 2005's Self record. I say grandest because it's 80 minutes long, although thankfully Vernon splits it up over 17 songs instead of 10 like previous albums have. And don't get me wrong, there are still songs that overstay their welcome, including the staggering 12-minute long closing track, We Will Never Die. But otherwise, this is a fairly palatable album considering its length. This album is notable for being the first Justin Vernon project to focus on folk music, which is admittedly not a huge transition to make when coming from a genre like Americana, but the differences are noticeable, particularly in the more reflective type of songwriting and the increasingly cryptic lyricism that Vernon adapts here. I would argue that this record is the definitive transition point between the collegiate Justin Vernon and the weathered Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. Hell, some of these tracks could very easily be mistaken for Bon Iver demos. Really, the main distinction between these two eras of his music is the fact that the iconic Bon Iver falsetto is still not being used much, although it does pop up here and there, such as in the song Above the Code. Most of the time, Vernon just sings in his normal chest voice, and on this record in particular, he sounds like a strange hybrid of Bruce Springsteen and Randy Newman. And this isn't a bad thing. There are also foreshadowings of Vernon's later electronic pursuits toward the middle of the album in tracks such as Right Down There in Your Tributary and The Orient and the Gatsby's slew of choices. Some would say that Self Record is about as good as some Bon Iver records, and personally, I think it's a tier below most of them due to its slight unevenness and daunting length, but it is by far the most defining artistic statement of Vernon's career to date, and a very recommended listen for those fans of his who haven't explored it yet. Vernon's other solo record during the DeArmond Edison days was 2006's Hazelton's. As opposed to Self Record, Hazelton's clocks in at barely over 30 minutes in length, and if Self Record was the linkage between collegiate Justin Vernon and Bon Iver's Justin Vernon, Hazelton's is essentially only one step removed from the Bon Iver sound. The track Frail Sail features Justin singing in his falsetto throughout an entire song for the first time, though I can't say it sounds particularly good. His singing is kind of pitchy in that track, and I suppose in a way it kind of makes sense why he would use auto-tune for the Bon Iver albums after this. The track Hazelton has a guitar riff that seems to have heavily inspired the song Holocene. I really can't get over how similar those two riffs sound to each other. Unfortunately, while similarities such as these are nice for those of us mapping out Vernon's artistic progression, the truth is that Hazelton's is actually a noticeably weaker effort than its predecessor. The album doesn't flow all that well. I honestly have no idea what the fuck Game Night is doing in the track listing. It's an interlude song with just absolutely no point whatsoever. And while I think the track Song for a Lover of Long Ago shows off Justin's guitar playing as well as any song he's ever done, it meanders like so many early Vernon songs do, and the appeal is lost somewhat, at least to me. I would listen to Hazelton's if you really want to hear the artistic evolution and understand what Justin Vernon was up to before Bon Iver, but I don't consider it a great piece of work by any stretch. And now we reach the part of Justin Vernon's life that has become probably the most well-known tale in all of independent music over the past decade. A tale that has really come to define the so-called sad guy with the guitar aesthetic. The tale goes something like this. Around the middle of 2006, Vernon contracted a severe form of mononucleosis, which left him bedridden for 3 months with various liver problems. Around that time, DeArmond Edison had already been fracturing due to various disagreements among the band members, and this disagreement culminated with Vernon being kicked out of the band in September of that year. Also splitting up with Vernon around this time was his longtime girlfriend, Christy Smith. And while Vernon maintained a close relationship with Smith and would eventually make up with his ex-bandmates, it left him in an impossibly deep rut. And after recovering and producing an album for another band, he drove to Eau Claire, eventually ending up at his father's hunting cabin in the woods. This is where Vernon would live for the next 3 months over the winter of 2006 and 2007. And it was at this cabin where For Emma Forever Ago was made. One of the most striking things about For Emma is its wide-reaching ambiguity. The Emma in the title of the record explicitly refers to Vernon's former girlfriend, Sarah Emma Jensen, and most of the songs on For Emma concern his relationship with Christy Smith. But as Vernon himself has pointed out in the past, the identity of Emma is unimportant. The name can refer to anybody. The mournful, melancholy sentiments expressed on this record are universal. And make no mistake, Justin Vernon is far from the first sad male person to pick up a guitar and make an album talking about how sad he is. I mean, Nick Drake, Elliott Smith, Jackson C. Frank. The list goes on. But not only are the circumstances preceding this record's creation absurdly unfortunate, there is an atmosphere of desolation on For Emma that is debatably unequaled in all of folk music. The production is drenched in reverb. Vernon's almost exclusively falsetto vocals have a touch of auto-tune to them now, and the lyrics, oh my god. The lyrics on this album hit me to my core every time. They are the definition of heartbreaking, and understand, though, that I don't refer to heartbreak in the schmaltzy sense or in any sort of over-the-top saccharine way. This is genuine. This is deep. This is the type of heartbreak that endures. And For Emma runs the gamut of that term. The immediacy of flume, the self-disgust that laces skinny love, the regret of the wolves, the suicidal reflection of blindsided, the wistful nostalgia of For Emma, and the painful acceptance of regarding Stax. All these themes conveyed with just vocals, guitars, and the occasional bit of sparse percussion. It's as lo-fi as you can get. Vernon himself said that the songs were intended as demos, not as any sort of a finished product. And yet, here we are, and what we have is this insanely sad and touching indie folk album that has grown to become one of the genre's defining records, not just of the decade, but of all time. It is an essential album for music fans, a terrific wintertime album, and one that you'll undoubtedly need some tissues for. I know I've needed them in the past. In any case, after Vernon returned to the normal world, so to speak, he was convinced by friends to release the For Emma tapes on MySpace, which he did because that was back when MySpace was actually relevant. He released the album in June 2007 under the name Bon IVER, which is French for Good Winter, and within months, major music publications such as Pitchfork were labeling it one of the best albums of the year. This piqued the interest of several record labels, and it ended up being Jaguar that signed Vernon to a record contract in October of 2007. For Emma was officially released on February the 19th, 2008, and in that moment, Justin Vernon, via his new project, Bon IVER, started becoming one of the biggest names in all of independent music. Vernon's attention was not entirely focused on the newfound fame that the Bon IVER name had brought him, however. In 2008, Vernon got together with former DeArmond Edison guitarist Phil Cook and drummer Brian Moen to record a 5-song blues rock EP under the name The Shouting Matches. It was entitled Mouth Oil, and while it wouldn't see official release until 5 years later, it still shows an interesting alternative side of Vernon's musical palette. His gruffer chest voice suits most of these songs well, though he does work his now trademark falsetto into a couple of songs, like the closing track House Call. It's not a particularly substantial listen, but it's a fun one, and it's pretty well executed all around. The second project under the Bon IVER name was the EP Blood Bank, released on January the 20th, 2009. Unsurprisingly, the aesthetic of this release is heavily indebted to that of For Emma. In fact, the title track was even an outtake from the For Emma sessions. What can be said about this EP is that there is less reverb this time around, which I think contributes to a feeling of greater peace, I guess. The song Beach Baby addresses the issue of a girlfriend leaving, as many songs on For Emma do, but the wistfulness of this song has a sort of sunny spin on it, almost optimistic sounding thanks to these open-sounding strummed guitars. Ironically, though, the song that rejects this piece is by far the highlight of the record. The song Woods is a completely a cappella piece that focuses on Vernon's voice alone, repeating the same 4 lines over and over, gradually layering vocals on top of each other until the cacophony of voices is about to drive the listener insane. It's a remarkable commentary on the concept of isolation and how it can drive a person mad, and as far as I'm concerned, it might very well be the best song of his career. Vernon's other major release of 2009 was part of a project that he had been involved in off and on for several years, a Wisconsin-based project named Volcano Choir. Initially formed as a collaboration with the Milwaukee-based post-rock outfit Collections of Colonies of Bees, a band Vernon was a self-professed fan of, Volcano Choir didn't record any studio material until the winter of 2008, when Vernon was first setting up his home studio. The project was not even thought of as a full-on band effort until after the sessions ended. Band or not, however, the sessions proved fruitful all the same, and the result was Unmap, released September the 22nd, 2009. Those looking for a structured, focused piece of art inside of Unmap will be sorely disappointed. The flow of this record is uneven at best, and very few of the songs feel anything like what Vernon has dabbled in before. These tracks are experimental, not boundary pushing, but certainly diversions for both Vernon and the other members compared to what they've done previously. Vernon's primary contribution to this album is his singing, and Even then, it doesn't take center stage like most vocals from bands tend to do. It's just another piece of the tapestry, weaving its way into the soundscape and stepping into the spotlight only occasionally. This is a nice concept, but I have to be honest, I generally don't find Unmapped to be a very satisfying listen overall because of a lot of these factors. Many of these songs seem either incomplete or as if they don't end in a very cathartic manner, sometimes changing their tempo or mood entirely, 90% of the way through the song with no real justification for doing so. I'm also not entirely sure what the point of Imbira in the Morass is. It's a very strange attempt at atonal music, I guess, that feels out of place in an already bizarre record, which is saying something. The song still uses the vocal tracks from Woods and layers an interesting, if somewhat over-the-top instrumental backing over them. Supposedly, this version of the song existed before the original Woods, so it might be difficult to critique with that in mind, but fans of the original Woods have no need to revisit this track, and frankly, I don't think much reason to visit this album in general. Work would continue on a proper studio follow-up for Emma Forever Ago throughout the years 2009 and 2010, but in the meantime, Vernon found himself to be a rather hot commodity in the music industry. He guested on Aeneas Mitchell's concept album Hadestown, playing the role of Orpheus, and after being contacted by none other than Kanye West, Vernon guested on several tracks on Kanye's album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, most noticeably on the track Lost in the World, which samples the song Woods. He also provided vocals and production duties for the Minneapolis-based indie supergroup Gang's debut record Related, released May the 11th, 2010. While Vernon is certainly not the centerpiece of this record, I think it is worth a listen for yet another example of his diverse taste in musical projects. Related is an interesting combination of song structures based off of 80s soft rock with dense, massive R&B flavored production. It's a bit like Volcano Choir's Unmap as far as its occasionally uneven song structure is concerned, but I think Related does a better job of relaying a consistent theme and having a consistent album flow throughout. Not great, but worth a shot for Vernon fans, without a doubt. And finally, after 3 years of waiting and consistent behind-the-scenes work, followers of Bon Iver ended up getting what they wanted. The second proper Bon Iver studio album, Bon Iver, released June the 17th, 2011. As opposed to the previous two Bon Iver releases, Vernon brought in a diverse array of musicians to help augment and embellish the record's sound, including some of his touring players such as Sean Carey, who has gone on to have a successful career in the indie folk scene himself. And while Vernon has traditionally not been one to spare any expense when it comes to incorporating heavy doses of musicians in his records, this album is actually somewhat tame compared to a few of Vernon's other projects. There is at least enough clarity in the mix here to prevent the instruments from becoming just this impenetrable wall of noise. While Bon Iver doesn't have the emotional weight of For Emma Forever Ago, it does possess a comparable level of song quality. The track Holocene is absolutely ethereal, a potent and perfect combination of all the elements of this record's sound, dense layers of instrumentation, vocal harmonies, and a set of lyrics that just allow the listener to sit back and reflect on their place in life. Maybe nothing else here is quite as awe-inspiring as that, although the tracks Perth and Washington come close, and Beth Rest is way overhated by most people. So what if it's an 80s soft rock pastiche? I still love it. But as I see it, this entire record evolves the For Emma formula absolutely perfectly for a new era, both for Vernon's music and for his mental state. He's no longer physically or mentally constrained to recording demos on a 4-track tape recorder in a Wisconsin log cabin. He's a respected artist who has the freedom to hire additional musicians to acquire the sound he covets. And as far as this reviewer is concerned, it's still a brilliant sound. I don't even know if this album is really even a step down from For Emma. It's just an artistic evolution that I prefer ever so slightly less to the record and sound that it spawned from. However, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Vernon has sought to prevent Bon Iver from defining him as an artist. After touring and other promotional efforts for Bon Iver, Vernon announced in September of 2012 that he was going to wind down the project for a while until such a time when he felt ready to return to it. The following year saw Vernon return to two older projects of his. The first was the band The Shouting Matches, who released their first full-length project, Grown Ass Man, on April the 16th, 2013. While the band's first EP, Mouth Oil, was pure blues rock through and through, this record infuses a bit of country into their sound, particularly in songs such as Gallup, New Mexico. Much like the debut effort, there's little actual artistic value to this record, since it's basically just three guys dicking around with blues riffs and country grooves, but for being a fun side project as a means of releasing energy, it's pretty well done, and I genuinely had fun listening to it, so yeah, I'm gonna recommend it. The other, much more significant project dropping in 2013 was the second Volcano Choir album, Repave, released on September 3rd of that year. Vernon's contribution to this record was much the same as it was on Unmapped, contributing exclusively vocals to songs that were more or less already finished pieces. Thankfully, Repave is a much more cohesive work than its predecessor, less prone to long diversions and doodling, and feeling much more like a collection of proper songs. These tracks are more acoustic-driven and feel more personal this time around. The song Comrade is a clear standout, combining the anthemic style of power pop bands like Bastille with spaciously interlocking synthesizers and guitars that ebb and flow with one another. With these aspects in mind, it does make sense that a lot of people refer to this album as almost a Bon Iver Part 3, but I don't agree with that perception. While some of the textures are reminiscent of the self-titled Bon Iver record, there is a sense of community and interplay between the different instruments that makes the song sound more unified, like a proper collaboration of musicians instead of Vernon directing a group of session players. Vernon himself has said that making Repave was one of the most energizing musical experiences of his life, and it is patently clear that he enjoyed himself while making it. Fans of Bon Iver who want an entry point into Justin's other work should really start here. This is an excellent album, and I cannot recommend it enough. But now we go from the best entry point into Vernon's other efforts into the absolute worst. In 2014, Justin co-produced and provided vocals for a collaborative project spearheaded by Minneapolis-based hip-hop artist Astronautalis, and also featuring Ryan Olsen from Gangs and Bon Iver's drummer Sean Carey. The album was called De Oro and was released under the name Jason Feathers. Yeah, goddamn, this is pretty bad. The entire record centers around Astronautalis' rapping, which is not only painfully mediocre and devoid of intriguing lyrics, but completely reliant on artificially lowered vocals. In essence, it's a white guy trying to sound like a black guy by lowering his voice 2 or 3 semitones. You can see the problems there. Vernon handles about half of the hooks on this record, Sean Carey takes the rest, and they are what they are for the most part, apart from the track Cyclone, which does feature some genuinely very passionate vocals from Justin. Again, I guess this project is interesting in that it's nice to see Vernon dabbling in different genres, but this is a project that kind of just falls on its face pretty damn hard. Not worth your time. Interestingly enough, however, this Jason Feathers project may very well have been the most impactful project to the gestation process of the as of yet unannounced third Bon Iver album. Recorded over the span of 4 years, this LP was debuted at an Eau Claire music festival in 2016, marking a surprising return for Vernon's most famous project, one that many had assumed was possibly gone forever after his previous dismissive comments and his desire to pursue Volcano Choir further. The album in question, 22 A Million, was released on September the 30th, 2016, and to say it's a stark departure from the previous 2 Bon Iver projects is a gross understatement. This is Justin Vernon diving headfirst into the world of folktronica, an album based heavily around samples and vocals that will often either be pitch shifted or run through a vocoder, depending on the song in question. The production has taken a much more visceral approach thanks to this change, exemplified on the track 10 Death Breast in particular, with its bass drum samples that have been amplified to the point of frequent clipping. Decisions such as this have made the production of the album a very frequent target for criticism, and I can't say I have a good response for that criticism because the vast majority of it is pretty valid. So the question is, does 22 a Million still have the soul and the heart that exemplified the previous Bon Iver releases? It absolutely does, in my opinion. The lyrical subject matter is still very centered around relationships, very human matters that, per usual, are cloaked in metaphors, neologisms, and other obscure references. The song 29 Stratford Apartments is classic Bon Iver in how it takes a particular scene from Vernon's life and freezes it in time, allowing us the privilege of hearing his observations on life for him as a younger lad. It's also the closest to a standard Bon Iver song that we have on the record, although the track 8 Circle feels like a sort of sequel to Beth Rest off the self-titled record. 22 a Million is a mess, and understandably it has been easily the most polarizing thing Vernon has released to date for both fans and critics alike. Personally, I think it's a beautiful mess if one can look beyond the rather schizophrenic production. If you didn't like it the first time around, I encourage you to give it another go because I think there are some very special things that can be found inside of this record. While Bon Iver has not released any music since 22 a Million, Vernon has kept the name alive via various tours and one-off concerts throughout the world, adapting many of the older Bon Iver songs to his new folktronica-centered style. And whether it's because of this drastic stylistic change or not, it seems as though, at this point in time, Vernon is comfortable with having Bon Iver take center stage and maintain precedence over other projects of his. That's not to say that he's abandoned other projects in the process, however. Aaron Dessner, the primary songwriter for the rock band The National, had been working off and on with Vernon on various tracks since 2008, when he submitted Vernon an instrumental demo of a track entitled Big Red Machine. Just under a decade later, the duo would convene in Dessner's home studio to casually write and record a series of tracks. The collaboration was publicly announced that summer, and on July 6, 2018, the aptly named Big Red Machine dropped a self-titled 4-track EP, teasing a full-length release to come shortly down the line. The 10-track self-titled Big Red Machine LP dropped on August 31st, 2018. For being a collaboration of the masterminds behind two of the most well-known indie acts of the last 10 to 15 years, this is a pretty disappointing release. Not for anything it does particularly wrong, but because it's just not doing enough. It's a pretty nice collection of moody electronic beats with some nice guitar layering from Dessner and Vernon delivering. You know what? I actually don't think his vocals are very good on here. He sounds like he's coasting on talent on this record, something that you couldn't accuse him of doing for even the worst projects he's been involved with in the past, like Jason Feathers. Another problem with this LP is that the teaser EP contained probably the 4 best, most complete sounding songs on the record. The track Forest Green in particular is very good. The arrangements on this song keep my attention longer than anything else on the record, really. Most of this album is a snooze fest, though, I really can't lie. And like several other projects of his throughout the years, it seems like this album is mostly Vernon just shaking off the compositional cobwebs and trying to at least get something down on paper. Pleasant enough, far from essential. And so we hit the present day, and I have to say, researching for this guide was an enlightening experience as far as understanding Justin Vernon is concerned. It's only with listening to his various projects through the years that we can really understand how Vernon evolved from obscure Wisconsin-born singer-songwriter into one of the most important names in independent music today, and more specifically how Bon Iver has grown to define his artistry in a lot of people's eyes, even if that's not what Justin may want necessarily. Vernon brings a wealth of influences to the table in every project that he does, and it's clear that he can easily adapt to whatever style he or his collaborators ask him to work in. Is he a genius? I don't know. That's a very subjective and vague term to throw around, but I will say that he is one of the most versatile individuals in the entirety of independent music today, and that is his major asset and the reason why he has the staying power that he does. The biggest point that I wanted to make in this video is that analyzing the music of Bon Iver alone is just missing the forest for the trees. There was a plethora of musical and personal material that brought Justin Vernon to that specific Wisconsin cabin in that specific winter to make that specific music. It is impossible to treat that work in any sort of a vacuum. Context is key, and I really hope that I've been able to provide some of that here. At the moment, there have been no announcements of future Justin Vernon related projects, but a man with as prolific an attitude as he has won't remain idle for long, and I expect we'll see more of him very soon. That concludes this video, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. The next discography guide will be on the British rock legends Queen. I think there's a movie out about them right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I promise that I will have the next guide up much faster than I did this one. I promise you won't have to wait 2 months for the next guide. I promise. Really. And with that, guys, I will catch you later. Have a good one.